Gone back to shorten.
Hi everybody, it's 8 o'clock. We'll just give it a minute or so for people to come into the virtual room. It just takes a minute or two for people to join. In the meantime, you're welcome as always. I'm sure you all know the score by now to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're dialing in from, where you are in the country or the world. And Nathan's already remembered, but if you select, if you're adding to the chat, you need to select the message to go to everyone. The default is for it just to go to hosts and panelists. So I can see you and Clive can see you, but that's not as interesting as if everyone can see you. So the numbers are still going up slightly. So I'll give it another few seconds and then we'll start.
Oh, someone in Dumfries. I lived there for 5 years.
Great. So welcome everybody to this evening's talk. We're here with Clive Parker, who has completed several big tours, and he's going to talk about not just those tours, also what happens after a big tour. I'm sure most of, if not all of you, have now attended one or more of these virtual festival talks. But just to remind you, if you want to ask a question, then it helps if you use the Q&A box, because the chat box gets a whole stream of correspondence and I tend not to be able to see everything in there. Brenda's got a hand up. If you want to ask a question, Brenda, if you can pop it in the Q&A box, then I'll be able to see what the problem is. You can use the chat box to introduce yourself or to comment on the talk or to add your own input on things. People generally sort of add their view. The festival is a voluntary event. No speakers get paid, and it's organised largely by volunteers, although there is some paid admin time these days, or else it wouldn't happen. As you will all know, because I've said it millions of times, we don't want cost to be a barrier. It's all about encouraging more people to undertake adventures by bike. So everything is free at the virtual festival, but if anybody wants to donate and you haven't done already, then I will pop a link to the PayPal donation account in the chat later on. So feel free to make a donation. It is the suggested donation is £5 a talk or £20 for the whole festival. So, but it's entirely voluntary, that contribution. It's just sort of if you can and if you're willing to. Brilliant. I think that's everything I have to say. So I will hand over to Clive and enjoy the talk, everybody.
Right, shall I start speaking now? Okay, good. Hello, everybody. You'll have to bear with me while I get used to the screen sharing philosophy. Here we go. Yes, my name is Clive Parker, and in 2005-06, I did a 7,000-kilometer bike ride called Pedaling to Panama, which was from northern Mexico to the banks of the Panama Canal. And if I can show you myself again, what I'm now going to do is to show you briefly on Google Maps where those places are. Just bear with me. Let's put in Mexico and see what happens. M-E-X-I-C-O. Right. That's great. Okay, now I hope you can see that. Share screen. Share screen. Right. So I started in northern Mexico, quite close to the USA border, and went through Mexico, which took about 3 months, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, El Salvador, and Honduras. And the journey took about 7 months. And I resigned from my job to do that. So after I came back, I gave quite a few talks about it. And common questions were, here's a picture of me. Yeah, here's a picture of me on the banks of the Panama Canal, which is, I think that, right, let's share that again. That didn't work. Hang on. Share. Right, that should work now. That's good. And here I am on the banks of the Panama Canal, having finished the cycle ride. It's something that I'd wanted to do for some years. And the reason I chose that particular moment to do it was that I'd been in a very stressful job with a lot of anxiety as a senior finance and accountancy manager in a firm. And the way I dealt with that was by handing in my notice and telling them that I was going cycling. And one of the consequences of that was that afterwards, I just found that I've had less anxiety, less stress. And I think that's quite an important thing to say, because a lot of people have stressful jobs. A lot of people have anxiety. And it took me a lot of nerves, a lot of guts to do that, I think. And I remember a few days after I'd handed in my notice, one of the directors happened to be in the lift with me going up, just me and him. And I looked at him and I said, "I bet you think I'm crazy handing in my resignation." And he said, "Actually, I envy you. I wish I could do the same myself." And then the lift doors opened and he popped out. And I thought, wow, that was quite good. I was pleased that he said that. So that's one change in my life, less anxiety, I think. There's a little map of my route through Mexico, a dotted line. I did that for the publisher of my book because they said, we need to put a map in. And I drew a little map by hand, because in those days we didn't have Google Maps. And you can see my route as a dotted line. I'm not going to talk much about pedaling to Panama because that was 17 years ago. And I have done several trips since then and a few talks as well. And there's the route through Central America, because it's long and thin. Mexico and Central America are kind of long and thin, a bit like Scotland on its side, I suppose. So just to continue the theme, other changes that I found in myself. I suppose doing a tour like that for 7 months when you only have 2 panniers and a small backpack, notice I travel light, or that I'm more adaptable. When you have limited things with you, then you have to make the most of what you have. Examples being using my bank card to slice cheese. I'm sure we've all done that, but make sure you don't spoil the magnetic strip on the back, otherwise you might not be able to take out any cash. Another example was, I remember one night in Mexico, I was staying in a fairly cheap hotel. And when I went to bed, although I could lock the door from the outside when I went out for a walk, when I went to bed, I realized I couldn't lock the door from the inside, but I very quickly saw that I could jam it with my spoon. So that was quite quite amusing, I think. Another thing that I think a change that this made to me was that if I talk about alcohol, nicotine, cannabis, gadgets, there's one thing in common, and that's addiction. And although I said in my book quite openly that I had a beer or two every night when I finished cycling, one thing I didn't have, being 2005-6, was a lot of gadgets, no mobile phone. It amazes me now that I managed to get from northern Mexico to Panama without a mobile phone, but that's how it was. So I think I've learned that I still don't need to be addicted to gadgets. I don't need to set sat-nav to find my way home from the co-op, like I believe some people do. And I certainly don't walk around home carrying my mobile phone. In fact, I can't even remember where it is now, but I have turned it off. Okay, so that's 3 things that I've found. Another big change, I suppose, is that it made me want to take my bike everywhere I went. And Trailfinders started to see me as the guy that cycled into the Trailfinders branch here in Glasgow. And then I wanted to book a flight somewhere. And then after a couple of years of this, they said, "And I bet you want to take your bike with you." Yeah, okay. And of course, every airline has a page on their website about sports equipment, which is bikes, golf clubs, and surfboards. And I've never flown anywhere with a surfboard. I'm not sure that I want to, but golf clubs, yeah, a friend of mine does that, and a bike. So next thing, I think, don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to do it. And I've got a picture about fear and danger. I'm going to show this one, I think. Go on, open. hopefully you can see that. And I'm not going to say that I jumped into the river, because fear is a balance of knowing what the dangers are and knowing how to deal with them. This was in Costa Rica, and I noticed some people leaning over a parapet, looking down into the river. And I stopped cycling and I thought, I wonder what they're looking at. And of course, when I looked over the parapet, I thought, oh my God, or OMG, as people now say. So the danger is there, but live with it and know how to deal with it, weighing up the danger. And I suppose another change that it made in me was realizing the difference between being alone and being lonely, because quite often people said to me, were you ever lonely on a 7-month trip? And I think the answer to that is, I never felt lonely because there were always people around. When you travel, especially when you travel alone, there are always other people around you can talk to, you can make friends with, short-term friends, but friends nonetheless. And I'm always happy being alone because I'm quite a good loner. And I think that's maybe a skill that some people could develop, of understanding that you can be alone and not be sad, because I think being alone and happy is not the same as being lonely and sad. So I was able to learn the difference there and appreciate that. Another change that I think I knew this all along, but I suppose another change was that traveling like that and meeting a lot of people and depending on a lot of people for help and advice and information. Speaking of information, if you ask for directions in Mexico, always make sure you ask 2 or 3 people to corroborate, because they always tell you what you want to hear. Like the next village is just 10 minutes down the road when it could be 10 miles or even further than that. So I learned the hard way to corroborate any information. So you ask about 3 people the way to wherever, San Cristobal, and if 2 of them give the same answer, then there's a greater chance that might be right. But basically people want to be kind and they want to be helpful. And I suppose that brings me on to warm showers. And what I'm going to do is show a few pictures of my warm showers experiences, because when I did the trip, warm showers didn't exist. So I started using warm showers on subsequent trips, including I'm just trying to get the share screen, including a return trip that I did to Mexico. 10 years after I did pedaling to Panama, I went to Mexico to do some new routes and to do one of the routes that I did before. And by then I was using warm showers. And here's a little house I stayed at in Tuxtla Gutierrez, a 2-room home of a Mexican guy who is a host on warm showers called Roberto. And there's Roberto. He's not a tourer, he just likes cycling around his city, and he campaigns for cycling routes. The reason he does warm showers, knowing that even though he's not going to travel anywhere because he doesn't have the money to do so, is because he likes meeting foreigners and hearing about our travels, and he likes being kind to us. So he was kind to me. I was the first one to use his inflatable mattress, which he bought especially for warm showers guests. And a couple of nights we watched football together on the television, so that was really nice. So he's a great guy, Roberto in Tuxtla Gutierrez. And then there's another place in Mexico I went to called Villa Hermosa, which is Spanish for pretty town, and it's neither a town nor pretty. As Juan told me, he said, this is Villa Hermoso, but it's neither Villa nor Hermoso. And he gobsmacked me, if that's the right verb, by arriving to meet me outside the supermarket on a Brompton, which I didn't know you could buy in Mexico. And he was very proud of his Brompton. And then we pedaled off to his flat. I think it was around Christmas. He put some Christmas lights out. So that was Roberto. I'm going to stop sharing again for a bit. Yep, that's good. That's working okay. And I'll show you a couple more pictures, I think, of another trip, of the same trip, because, and this is about kindness and whether you do the right thing in life. Making the decision is always the hardest part of anything. Once you've made the decision, everything fits into place. Right, share. This looks like a lock-up garage, but and it's in a place called Chapa de Corzo de Chapa, sorry. And a posada is a small guest house. And this man had converted his guest house, sorry, he converted the front of his house and the whole of the ground floor into a small guest house. And the reason I went back there was because when I was doing pedaling to Panama, I stayed there. And when I left in the morning, the owner said to me, I wish I was doing what you're doing. But he said, I'm a little bit old for that, I'm 70. 10 years later, he was still there running the hotel. And I was 10 years older, he was 10 years older. And he remembered me. And it brought a tear to my eye that he remembered me. And he asked me how I got on and was very pleased to hear that I had actually made it to Panama, because a lot of people had told me I wouldn't make it because I'd be killed in the next village and all the other stuff that you get. Everybody says you're going to be killed in the next village. And then in the next village, they say you're going to be killed in the next village. And so it goes on. And that was the room. He gave me the same room that I'd had 10 years before. So another change, I suppose, that I could list of what does the big trip do to you is that it made me appreciate simple things, a very simple room. And the metal partition you can see is where the shower and the toilet are. Not much furniture, but enough when you're cycling all that way. Okay, so where did I go next? If I go back to my website, I'm not going to talk about Ecuador very much because that was where I went next after the big trip. I did a smaller big trip, 2 months cycling around Ecuador, 1,000 miles, I think it was. One thing that I remember about it, because people tell me Ecuador is dangerous, and one thing I remember was sitting outside a cafe and a policeman stopped his car. He saw me and he came to sit with me for a chat to find out who I was and where I was from. And he said to me, are you carrying a gun? Which is like one of those can't win type questions, because if I'd said yes, he might have arrested me. But I said no. And then he said, I think you should. And I thought, if I did, I wouldn't know how to use it. I'd probably shoot myself in the foot. I won't talk a lot about Ecuador. I wrote an article about it in Cycle magazine, which you could probably find online if you want to read it, June 2007. I suppose the next thing I would like to talk about is, and I'm just finding something to share, if you bear with me. Right. Yes, I'm here now. The next thing that I want to talk about is the return trip away I made to Nicaragua. And I went back to Nicaragua 5 years after doing pedaling to Panama. 2 reasons why I went back to Nicaragua. 3 reasons, I suppose. The first reason was because I liked it. People always said to me when I did tours, which country did you like the best? And I always said, Nicaragua. Share. And then Nicaragua. So that's the first reason I liked it. The second reason I went back to Nicaragua was that when I was in Costa Rica doing pedaling to Panama, I had a bag stolen, which contained my camera and my films, because we had separate films in those days, you know, rolls of films that you put in the camera, blah, blah, blah. So I lost all my photographs of Nicaragua. So I wanted to go back and take some pictures, basically. And then the third reason that I went back to Nicaragua was that the first time I basically did a coastal route through Esteli down to Leon, and then down the Pacific coast through San Juan del Sur, and then into Costa Rica. And you can see on the map there, Lago Coquibalca, which is the local word for Lake Nicaragua. And at the time, there wasn't a road around Nicaragua. And that had been built 2 or 3 years after I was there. So I thought, well, what I'd like to do is to cycle round Lake Nicaragua. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to show some pictures of walking around Nicaragua. Might need to change the screen share. Stop share. Right, here we are. Let's go again. Optimize. Okay, now hopefully you can see that. If you can't, you put a note, can you flag up to Laura, and then she will speak to me. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Nicaragua, yeah, Central America. There's a car number plate just to show you. There's my Nicaraguan flag in my hallway above one of my bikes.
Clive, we can't see the pictures.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Let's go back to...
We can just see sort of Windows Explorer at the moment.
That's all you can see, is it? Okay.
Perhaps if you try sharing again, there we go. You're sharing again now.
Can you now see the film? It's the wrong film, sorry. Right.
Right, please give it 1 second. I think it'll load.
Can you see the Nicaraguan car number plate?
Not at the moment.
Right, in that case, I'm going to go to plan B. Okay, can you see that now?
At the moment, it's still a grey box.
I don't understand this.
No.
Let's try stop share.
Somebody in the chat has said you're sharing the Explorer and not the video playground. Yeah, I think when you open up the file from the Explorer window, it should open the photographs.
All right, I've got too many windows open, I think. Right, share screen. Right, can you see that now? What can you see?
It's just the grey box.
I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Stop share. Somebody said I must close Windows, did you say?
No.
Right, can you see a map of Nicaragua?
Yes.
Okay. So if I close that,
So somebody on the chat has said if you try playing the window, so before you share it, try playing the video on your own computer.
Yes.
And then when you click share,
Yes.
share the video as opposed to your Windows Explorer button. That's it. We're there. You've got your bike in the corridor with the flag above it.
Excellent. Right. Sorry about that, everybody.
Don't worry at all. Thanks, Clive.
Back to the car number plate in Nicaragua. That's just really an opening. And there's, no, it isn't. Oh, right. Right, and there's the Nicaraguan flag in my hallway. This is the boundary with the border, sorry, with Costa Rica. It's a river border, or at least it was then. They have now built another road. But I wanted to do this entry into Nicaragua from Costa Rica because it was a river boat crossing to the village of San Carlos, which you can see here. And San Carlos is a lovely little village. It's a lot of the houses are built on stilts, as you can see. And I spent 2 or 3 days there. It rains a lot and everybody dives for cover. Can't afford waterproof jackets, I think. A change that had happened since I was there before was the arrival of all these satellite dishes for the mobile phone company called Claro. Claro. One thing I liked about Nicaragua is the people everywhere, very friendly people. There's a castle here called El Castillo, very original name. And there you can see from the castle a view of the houses on stilts. And being on the river, the Rio San Juan, they do depend a lot on the river. And one particular time, they were moving cattle from one side of the river to another. And then several of the men from the village joined in to help with the effort to get the cattle across the river with the boat and the ropes and the horses. And of course, everybody was watching to see how they were going to do it. And because the cattle didn't really want to go in the river, and they were a little bit exhausted having been herded across the river to the other side. But it was quite a spectacle. And people did enjoy watching it if they could see it from their windows. And the ice cream seller was doing particularly well. Another event there was the football. I don't think they would get much approval to do a game like that in either Scotland or England, the muddy pitch. But the players were certainly enjoying themselves. I didn't see many fouls. You couldn't believe it, really. But that indicates how wet that part of the country is. And they like being photographed. They're certainly not shy, Nicaraguans. I think he was trying to look cool there. Team photo. And after the game, of course, no showers. They just went into the river for a wash. How about that? A bit further up on the side of Lake Nicaragua, San Miguelito, nice hotel there with a pier. I was the only person staying in the hotel, but the locals were enjoying the pier. Village shop. The bus from Managua called in. The man on the roof is the luggage attendant. In Central America, a lot of buses have a luggage attendant whose job it is to see the bags and the baggage and the chickens and the bikes on and off the bus. And this particular guy just sat on the roof all the way. So that amused me that he set off sitting on the roof. By now I'm 100 kilometers from San Carlos. Plenty of people by the side of the road. I mean, this was the brand new road they built from Managua down to San Carlos, which the farmers found very useful for herding their livestock. And this is market day. I told him it was unusual to see a milk churn in Britain. And there's a shop selling soft drinks. This is the same photo that I showed before. The reason I put it in again was it was around here that I was caught in a tropical rainstorm and I put the bike down and ran. I thought into a shop. I just ran into anywhere for cover. But when I got into what I thought was the shop, I discovered that I was in somebody's kitchen and she stood there looking at me and I stood there looking at her. And then I said, "Oh, sorry, I thought this was a shop." And she said, "Don't worry, just wait here till it stops raining." And we started chatting about the benefits of the new road. little bit of scenery, lovely scenery in Nicaragua. Parrots. And this guy was selling newspapers. La Prensa is a Nicaraguan paper, which I sometimes buy to catch up on Nicaraguan news. And his dream was to go to the United States. Well, I heard that story so many times that he was enjoying life, I think, walking around selling newspapers from his head in a place called Balaco. A nice restaurant, busy restaurant, market day there. Like I say, they like being photographed. Well, they don't mind anyway. She was showing off her beans. And he was, I think, showing himself off, to be honest. And this man was selling hammocks. That's what they are. Very useful things to carry, hammocks. There's a tuk-tuk driver. These little three-wheeled taxis, which are quite common throughout Central America. The tuk-tuks, because they go tuk-tuk-tuk. You get them in India as well. Tuk, 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 tuk. Laguna de Apoyo is a volcanic lake with a youth hostel full of young people drinking and making a lot of noise, but that's a sign of my age thinking that, I suppose. And nearby there's an active volcano where you're only supposed to spend 20 minutes peering into the crater because of the fumes. So I just moved from viewpoint to viewpoint, trying to extend my stay. And no side effects yet, hopefully. There's the car park, not very busy. And now I'm in Granada. And there's my hotel room. There's the cathedral. Very popular tourist place. That's probably the best view of Granada from another church. And this man was a musician, a traditional musician. I put the rocking chair in because a lot of Nicaraguans like to sit on the rocking chair in the evening, whiling away the evening, drinking rum. There we are, Flor de Caña, flower of the cane, the rum of Nicaragua. And there's the sun going down over the cathedral. Lovely place, Granada. This is the Lake Ometepe, choppy water again. So I didn't go on the ferry from Granada to Ometepe. I had to cycle down the side of Lake Nicaragua to the place called Rivas, which is another place where you can get the ferry. But I spent some time taking pictures of these little bicycle taxis, which I thought were really good. Friends in Lincolnshire tell me that you can't get a dentist anywhere in Lincolnshire. So if you live in Lincolnshire, you might like to go to Nicaragua and try your luck with this Argentinian dentist. Another cycle taxi. This one's got a horse, a bit more expensive to run. And this time I did make it to Ometepe, the island of Ometepe. When I did pedaling to Panama, the sea was too rough and I couldn't get a crossing. Sorry, not the sea, the lake, Lake Nicaragua. It's big enough to get rough when it's windy. Volcanic island. And there's the ferry. I had to take my bike up into the cafe for safekeeping, I was told. A lot of farm labourers on Ometepe. And this guy waiting to get into his local football ground. No, that was a joke. You often see people walking around with machetes. This guy was cleaning the dust off his beans by dropping them. Now, this guy, I told him I couldn't really get over the fact that in Nicaragua, people just walk around carrying machetes. You wouldn't see that in Scotland because you'd get arrested. And he said to me, no machetes, what do people use? And I said, well, machines, I suppose. Caught me out there. He just thought that everybody carried a machete, that was normal. And then I got back to Rivas from Ometepe, which you can see in the distance. And there's a village popular with American retirees called San Juan del Sur, which was quite close to the Costa Rican border. And there's the local beer, Toña. I'm Nicaraguan, like the river. And there is the sun going down. So I've stopped sharing because I'm now going to show some pictures of Australia and New Zealand. I'm not going to show too many of New Zealand. The reason I've got all the pictures of these places is that I have relatives in New Zealand, and I've been, in the last 10 years, I've been there 3 times to visit a lot of relatives and family members. And like I said earlier, I always take the bike with me. And I'm conscious of the fact that somebody's giving a talk about New Zealand in two nights' time, I think. So I'm going to show a few pictures of New Zealand and then focus on more on Australia. So let's hope this works. If I not that one. I'm now going to screen share again. Share screen. Right. Participants can now see your application, it says. So I'm not going to say much about New Zealand, except that if you go cycling there, you're probably going to want to cross the Cook Strait from Wellington to Picton. And hey, that shouldn't be there. Oh, here we are. Let's play this. Yeah, that's one of my favorite pictures of New Zealand, a dog taking his man for a walk. And there's Picton, which is more or less opposite Wellington. And there's ferries, of course, and there's a picture of me waiting for the ferry at Picton back to Wellington. You can see it's cycle friendly. One thing I like about the ferry is that some of the ferries take freight trains, and if you have a bike, they put the bikes on the same deck as the freight trains. The cars go on the upper deck. And I thought it was quite exciting getting on the rail deck, as they call it, with all the freight trains. Obviously, you don't go on as they're loading freight trains, but there we go. And there's a view of the ferry, Inter-Islander, very original name. Lovely scenery. You can't beat the scenery of the Queen Charlotte Sound, which is there on the bottomish part of the picture. But I have a cousin who lives near Tarctica, and I've cycled from Picton to Tarctica a number of times to see Jeff and his wife. And on one occasion, I went over the Marrow Ice saddle, which was quite grueling. I nearly didn't make it. And Jeff persuaded me to try flying Golden Bay Air. And there's my cousin Jeff helping me load my bike onto the plane, the 6-seater. And I had to dismantle the bike, and I had to buy a seat for the bike because Golden Bay Air told me they had to remove the seat for me to put the bike on. And they had to phone me back to tell me when I could book 2 seats, one for me and one for the bike. And they had to be sure of the seat not being required on the return journey from Wellington, which all sounds a bit complicated, but it worked very well. And there's Golden Bay taken from the plane. So there's a few shots now of the scenery. Like I say, a 6-seater. There's the pilot, 4 passengers, me and the bike. 1 engine. And I didn't used to like flying, but there we go. Sometimes needs must. And it was one of those experiences of a lifetime, which I can recommend, unless you're a large group. If you were a large group of cyclists, it would take you all week to go there and back, I think. But the views were certainly worthwhile. I can't remember how much it cost. It's probably best that I don't remember. 100 and something springs to mind. There's Mount Egmont there, which you probably can't see, but the pilot told us there was Mount Taranaki, as it's now called. And you can see the beautiful scenery. A lot of dead-end roads, quite frustrating for a cyclist because the roads are beautiful, but you can't put together a circular tour because all the roads are dead-end roads. I did do some of them. I have done some of them. There is a campsite down there which I have used. And you can see the ferry on the bottom right-hand side, heading towards Wellington. And there's another view of the ferry. The planes seem to be overtaking the ferry. And here we are circling around to land, hopefully, at the runway at Wellington Airport. And there we are next to the big planes. And it was a moment of pride because the four of us jumped out of this little plane and all the people in the terminal building were gawping down at us thinking, oh, I wonder where they've been, which is quite funny. And after a flight like that, you probably need a bottle of craft beer or craft cider. Boysenberry is a fruit similar to blackberry, which they make cider from. Final word about New Zealand. If you fly to Auckland, you might wonder, how on earth am I going to cycle out of the urban area? Well, there is a ferry to Coromandel, which is what I would say is a recommended route for getting out of Auckland if you're heading south. And I looked at the Fuller's website the other day. They do still take bikes free of charge on Fuller's ferry. And that's where the bike goes. Very formal, no chains or anything to lock it down. And there's a view of Coromandel. Oh, yes, a road safety notice. A few pictures now about Australia. The first time I went to Australia was a stopover on my way to New Zealand. And I thought, well, I suppose I have to see Sydney, but I probably won't like Australia. And I was totally wrong there because I liked Australia so much that I've been back several times. And there's this very good book, Cold Beer and Crocodiles, written by an American who lived in Australia. And he spent a year cycling all the way around Australia, 10,000 kilometers, I think. And the book is really fascinating. I can recommend that. Cold Beer and Crocodiles. Plenty of cold beer, but trips I'm going to mention are, first of all, the Great Ocean Road, which you can see down there by Melbourne. That's one trip I did. And then another trip is from Alice Springs to Uluru, which is the Aboriginal name for Ayers Rock, as some people may still prefer to call it. And that's the view from the roof of Melbourne Youth Hostel. And that's a train, a Victorian train, as in the state of Victoria. I always thought it was funny, Victorian trains. And there's Melbourne, top right-hand corner, and you take the train to Warrnambool, and then you cycle initially along the Hopkins training circuit, and then you end up on the coast road. And I'm going to focus on the 12 apostles. There are only 11 now because one of them collapsed into the sea. I think these are the highlights of the coastal road in the state of Victoria. Plenty of paths that you can walk along to get to from the road. Plenty of tourist coaches as well, but you can, on a bike, you can time it so you miss the tourist buses. You just kill a bit of time and let them all pack into the bus and drive off. And then you have the place to yourself for half an hour until the next tourist bus arrives. Until I went there, I really had no idea that Australia was so wonderful for cycling as well. The cycling route does go inland a short way, and then you're back on the coast with some beautiful sandy beaches and rocky beaches. You can see I'm now 206k from Warrnambool, getting quite close now to Melbourne. A sign pointing into the Bass Strait for some reason. And this is the town of Queenscliff, which is on one side of Port Phillip. And on the other side, you get the ferry to Sorrento, which is a bit of a shortcut because from Sorrento, you can get a suburban train back into Melbourne. Good trains in Australia on the whole, including this one, the Garn. The Garn, I'll explain, is the long distance train that goes right across the centre of Australia from Adelaide to Darwin. There was no way I was going to cycle from Adelaide to Darwin, probably physically impossible because of the lack of water. But I went on the Garn from Adelaide to Alice Springs. So if you're going to ask, can you take a bike on the Garn? The answer is yes. Two prices, one price for boxed, one price for unboxed. and I forget which was which. You'll have to ask Great Southern Railways. I think somebody changed that sign with a felt pen. Anyway, you can see how far it is to Darwin, quite a long way. Road trains. These are a bit of a hazard when cycling in Australia because they come up behind you and obviously they go past you, but you've no idea how long they are. They could be 2, 3, or even 4 trailers long. So that's just a word of warning. And here I am, only 441 kilometers from Uluru. Not much traffic, not many places to get water. You can, on the map does mark places where you can get water, including the roadhouses. And this is Stuart's Well Roadhouse. The dog allegedly sings, and you can camp there. That's the camping place. Whoops, I was going to say something about it, but it's gone on anyway. Yeah, the tent filled with ants, but. And this is another one called Ebenezer. This roadhouse was run by an Aborigine family, and they did traditional Aboriginal cooking, which was really nice. And that's my bunk-bedded room. The roadhouses, of course, are where there's a source of water. Desert. More desert, but with bush growing on it. That's a place, signposted, where you can get water in tanks. Some people don't like to drink it because it's been stored in a tank. You can see the green tank in the center of the picture, but you can help yourself to water. But I found cycling on a road like that people often stopped to ask if you were okay, offered you water. Some people even offered me food, which could be a problem if it's out of the fridge of their camper van, but there we go. Flies were a problem. Every time you stopped, you were surrounded by flies. But I found as long as you cycled at least 20 kilometers per hour, you could beat the flies because that seems to be their top speed, 20 km/h. That's not Uluru, it's Comna Peak, I think it's called, Comna Hill, something like that. This was taken from Curtin's Well. And there we are, there's Uluru, there's rock. Watch for wildlife. Now, when I first saw that sign, I thought, oh my God, crocodiles, because it does look a bit like a crocodile. But I later learned that it's a lizard, which is a protected species. Here's a tip if you want to go to Uluru, that it's a big advantage to cycle because it's an Aboriginal site and you have to pay to get in. You have to buy a pass. Most people go on the coach. You get a free glass of Chardonnay, but you're only there for about an hour while the sunset goes down, and then you head back into the tourist complex. But on a bike, you can just go at your own pace, and you can buy a 3-day pass and go in as many times as you like. So I did, I went in 3 times because that's how long I stayed there. Most people just go for the sunset and the glass of Chardonnay. It's overpriced, but there we are. Difficult to do justice to the sunset. Maybe I need a better camera. I don't do many selfies, but there's one. My final shot at showing some pictures of Australia is a little offshore island. Well, Australia is an island, but Tasmania. On one of my trips, I broke my journey at Melbourne and got a separate flight to Hobart, which you have to pay extra for because it's not on the direct route from anywhere to anywhere. And there's the wee plane, good for surfing, I suppose, swimming. And that's Wineglass Bay. The best scenery is where the clouds go. Another one of my little accidents, because when I got back to where I chained my bike, you might wonder why it's covered in foliage. Well, that's because a storm blew up while I was there, and the wind blew a tree onto my bike. Sod's law. It was okay. And this is Coles Bay. And there was an annoying estuary, which I thought I was going to have to cycle all the way around. And I chanced my luck. There was a guy there with a boat, and he was maneuvering it into the water. And I said, any chance of a lift? So I don't know whether that counts as having cycled all the way, but I don't really care. It was a good experience. And this is near a place called Swansea. And as any good Welshman would tell you, Swansea is well known for its lovely cafes and its beautiful beach. There we are, there's Swansea. I think that's the last picture. Not quite, there's the flight back to Melbourne. So I'm conscious of the time because I might be overrunning a little bit, but I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut out something. Right. Yes, I know what I'm going to do. We'll go back to share screen, something a little bit closer to home, I think. We've all been there, haven't we, an airport? Well, I bought a one-way ticket to Zurich, which made all my friends think I was running off with some money. So I assembled the bike in the baggage claim area because the trolleys at Zurich Airport have a silly band across them for some reason, and I couldn't put the bike box on it. A few pictures of Switzerland. I'll flip through these fairly quickly. Oberalp Pass, start of the Rhine Cycle Route. Another rare selfie. You have to take extra clothing for the start because you're 2,000 meters above sea level. I like that little sign warning motorists that snow might be sliding off the roof onto your Range Rover. An enterprising farmer converted a barn into a bunkhouse, sleeping on straw. Switzerland always looks so Swiss, but that's actually Liechtenstein. Whoops, that shouldn't be there, that's Nicaragua. Right. And this is Lake Constance. And that's Zeppelin, the man who invented the Zeppelin. Bodensee, it's called. And you can get the ferry across part of it to Constance. Beautiful villages on the border between Germany and Switzerland. Now, I said I was not relying on technology. Well, the name of that cafe speaks for itself. I didn't go in there. I did this trip just navigating with the Cicerone guidebook and using the local signs. That's Basel. That's France. Strasbourg Cathedral. This guy insisted on taking some pictures of me for some reason. I don't know why. The Rhine. I did enjoy the Rhine Cycle Route. And German cake. Whatever you say about Germany, they're good about making cakes. And forests. That's Speyer, S-P-E-Y-E-R. It took me about 2 weeks and it rained only, well, it hardly rained at all, but here are some cyclists gathering under the bridge from the rain. It was a good talking place, really. This is near Mainz. Vineyards. Oh, another selfie. Koblenz. Koblenz was the only place where I couldn't find accommodation. The good thing I'd say about Koblenz was that you can take your bike in the cable car. When I asked her, I said, can you take bikes in the cable car? She said, why, yes, of course. And I thought, oh, so I did. And that's the confluence of the Moselle with the Rhine. The Rhine Cycle Route does take you across the river a few times, and you go on the ferry, and there's a wee boy or a lad waiting for the ferry. but I don't think he was going very far. The reason for that picture is to show the tour boat in the background. That's Dusseldorf. That's Duisburg. And now we're in the Netherlands. I can't remember the name of this place. It's one of those unpronounceable Dutch names. Then the cycle path was closed because of major engineering works. So I had to take a detour into Utrecht. I got lost. It started raining. So what do you do in situations like this? You go into the station and lost the picture. And I got the train to Rotterdam, and there's Rotterdam. And here I am by the side of the sea, a Hook of Holland. Made it, apart from the train ride in the Netherlands. And that's the ferry back to Newcastle from IJmuiden, Tynemouth, and Newcastle upon Tyne. And I think I will end there because it's now 9 o'clock. And I think that's a little bit beyond my allotted time. So I'll just take it off share screen.
Thank you, Clive. We've got a couple of questions and we've got a couple of minutes if you've got if you're able to answer a couple of questions.
Yes.
So one is, well, there's two questions from Brenda. One is, do you ever camp in a tent?
Yes, quite a lot. When I did pedaling to Panama, I took my tent with me and a sleeping bag, really for emergencies. And I camped in Mexico about 7 times. The tent was stolen in Costa Rica, so that took away that option. But I do, yes. I travel light. I mean, I think you saw in most of the photos that I only have 2 panniers. And when I take a tent, I put it in a rucksack on the back carrier above the 2 panniers, and the sleeping bag is in one of the panniers. So I do take a tent quite often.
Okay. And then given the topic of your talk was about life after a big tour, did it take you a while to settle back into life when you get back home from a big trip?
Yes. Well, I decided I was going to write a book about it, which I have done, as you've seen, pedaling to Panama, and I might put a slide on the screen in a minute or two if I can, just to invite people to buy it. It took me a year to write the book, so that kind of focused my mind. A lot of motivation needed and a lot of research. Took me a while to settle back. Well, I spent a month in Spain, and that was a good way to settle back, I think.
Did you go back to work?
Yes, I did a temporary job in accountancy for 3 months, just to rebolster the finances, and that made me decide that I didn't want to go back to accountancy. So since then, I've been doing something completely different in the world of training, working with students at university, which I really enjoy. Less money, but more satisfaction.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? If it acts as a prompt for you to change your life, it's a good escape, a cycle tour, but actually ultimately your normal life needs to be satisfactory as well. So if the cycle tour forces you to make a change, then that's a good thing. That's and the other question we've got, and people are welcome to put in other questions in the Q&A box, but the other question is that Ted says he once met a well-known cycle tourer who'd written a best-selling book, and when he asked him if he would do his trip again now he was older and wiser, he said that he wouldn't. Now, would you do your trip again, Clive? My hunch is that you would say you definitely would, but it'd be interesting to know.
Well, as I said when I was showing my slides, I did go back to Mexico to do some of it 10 years later, and I also returned to Nicaragua for a short holiday. Would I do another long one? Yes, because I am thinking of going to Argentina, and Argentina is quite a big country. So I think that could happen. Yes, I would say that's a fair question. But obviously, as you get older, it gets harder. Although when I was in Honduras doing pedaling to Panama, I did pass a German guy who was in his 70s. I think he told me he was about 73, and he was just going more slowly and just taking his time. And obviously, if you're retired, you do have more time on a day-to-day basis, but less time in terms of the rest of your life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Always South America and Central America, apart from obviously the New Zealand. Have you ever done much in Asia or? Africa.
I had a stopover in Thailand on one of my New Zealand trips, and I did about a 2-week trip in Thailand. I got the train to Chiang Mai in the north, and I quite enjoyed that. But yes
and humid.
no. Yes and no. It's quite humid. Yes,
Yeah.
and there was a restaurant in a river in Thailand where all the tables and chairs were in the river, and people sat there with their feet in the river to keep. I went to Anne's funeral and met some of her family members, which was interesting. But there we go.
Okay. Super. That's all we've got time for this evening. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks to Clive for speaking and for sharing his stories. And we've got another talk tomorrow night at 8 p.m. and then again on every night this week at 8 p.m. and then Saturday, Sunday we've got plenty of talks as well.
Yes,
so
yes.
There's all the details are on the What's On page on the website. So thanks again everybody, and perhaps see you tomorrow night.
And I apologise for the technical difficulties, but it's an age thing. If I was 16, it would have worked perfectly.
Don't worry at all. It happens to everybody. Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers then. Bye.